Hi, Tia Jean here, and today I'm going to go over the basics of using Adobe Illustrator. So to continue the training series that I've been working on for using Adobe programs, the last one was Photoshop, and I figured today I should go over Illustrator. It's typically used for logos or large-scale printing, those kinds of things. On Illustrator, you use vector graphics, when on Adobe you use raster graphics, or more like the pretty pictures kind of thing, and this one is shapes, is kind of a way you could think about it. So I actually use Adobe Illustrator every day in my day job. We have to make different items for large printing, and in order to get things to scale, we have to create them in Illustrator, which makes them to that size. Otherwise, it's just not big enough. On a lot of Photoshop programs, you can get quite large, but to make, I work for a car wash company, and to make the arches, you have to make them quite large, and a lot of the times the program can't make them quite that big to where it doesn't have like a slight haze on the edge of it, so it's just easier just to make them within Illustrator. Typically with this, you would use it for like logos, like I'd said, the logos or sharp corners. It's not really something you would paint in. Although since the update to Illustrator a year ago, it's now changed to where you actually can do gradients a little bit differently, and I'll show you that. If you're new to Adobe Illustrator, I would definitely start out with using a couple of websites. I have a few I've already picked out here. I'll make it smaller so you can actually see it and just go out of screen. So you can use the typical Adobe stock if you want to pay for it, because you can get like a free monthly thing. But you can also get illustrations, vectors, and such on here, which you can then break apart. So if you see something on here like, oh, I want to make a logo out of this union, you could download it and pull it apart and make it whatever you were wanting it to be. That's one of the easiest ways of using Illustrator, is doing things like that. Otherwise, you could also go to free areas like pixabay.com is another one I use. I use that one for Photoshop as well, because you can find some very nice photos on there that you can use that are free. And you can also find different illustrations and then different vectors that you can find on here. Illustrator works in mostly vectors. You can put photos in there, but I wouldn't really recommend it. It's a little difficult to edit them in there unless you're using both programs to edit something. Otherwise, there's no real reason to put too many flat images in there. Otherwise, you're pulling apart. So all of these pieces are different pieces. Like, that's a piece, the blue's a piece, the white's a piece, the blue's a piece. Even that shadow in the background is a piece, and it actually fades out to a lighter color. All of these are different shapes, so it's basically layering a little bit differently, where in Photoshop you kind of layer on one layer. These you layer on multiple layers. And another website you can use is Vecteezy. I'm on here all the time. You can find a lot of stuff on here. And this is basically all vectors that are on here. And they try to make you sign up for free and everything. You can just put your information in. They actually don't charge you anything. They just kind of monitor who's logging in, I guess. But I do have a login. I don't use it a lot of the times. Most of the times I'm just on here and I'm like, steal. No, I don't want to log in. But you can find all kinds of stuff. You can even just type in logo, and you can find all kinds of different logo ideas. Of course, in the Pro, there is a paid version that you can do where you can get these, or you can just go through and find something that you like. Otherwise, there are things where I can show you way later down the line on how to actually take an image and turn it into a vector image. You can do that on Illustrator as well. So if you have a photo of somebody and you want to turn it into a vector image, like you see on those cool little snippets of people that all of a sudden have like a cool sharp edged picture, it's kind of the same concept. For now, what I'll do is, what do we want to mess with today? It's Christmas time, so let's do Christmas ads. It does have pop-up ads. So let's find something Christmassy or holiday-y that we can play with. This one's cute. Like a little Merry Christmas. So I'm going to free download that guy, free license, and here it is trying to make me sign in. So I'll just click back out, and I'm just going to click that again and just click there, and there you go. It's automatic download. And then you'll see it come in as a zip file here. You just click on that guy and it'll pull it right up here for you, and you can see it's showing the Illustrator right here. You can also get an SVG file, which you can use that for if you have a Cricut. SVG files work on those Cricut programs, and you can actually create those within Illustrator. So I'm just going to double click on this guy and open it up in Illustrator to show you a few things within this program. So today I'm actually using my keyboard because using the pen tool for this one doesn't work quite as well. You can, and sometimes I do. I'm just so used to using a mouse. Can't really see it on that shot there. It's a little Razer mouse is typically what I use when I'm using this program. But as you can see, when you click on it, there's so many different layers within there. But let's start with the basics. We're gonna go back a step real quick. So if you're opening a brand new file, you would go File, New. And whether it's print, web, mobile, whatever you want to use, I typically go to print, just like I do on Photoshop. I would go to inches, select your inches on which direction you want to go. And a lot of the times in this, I will measure out the size that I need beforehand because this can print to scale. You can change it for whatever you're making. Typically it's going to be an 8.5 by 11 one way or the other, or 11 by 17. It just depends on what you're making. The other thing is whether or not you want to work in CMYK or RGB. If you switch between the two, you will notice that the color suddenly dims. So if you're working in RGB, which works with a true black, and then you switch over to CMYK, you'll all of a sudden see that color diminish. So you want to be careful between switching between RGB or CMYK. Same thing with your high definition and everything. Those I wouldn't really mess with. And then you would hit create. But since I'm working with this little file, I'm going to show you kind of how it breaks down. So a lot of the times when you're working with Illustrator, you're going to use typically just your type tools for writing words, and then using your select is how you're going to grab the corners and pull. The reason that it's not doing this wonky thing every time I pull is I'm holding down shift, which keeps it from changing its size. So when you're using anything within Illustrator and you see these anchor points and you don't want it to change its shape, you're going to hold down shift. With your text, you can change your text if you go over to the properties bar here, and underneath character you'll see multiple different kinds of text you can get. You can also find more through the Adobe font. I do not have mine set up, obviously. So typically I will just go on here and use what's in here. Otherwise, you can go to dafont.com is a website that you can go to find different fonts to use. And they have several different options up here. There's also 1001fonts.com, which also have, both of these have free and also donations or download for money on here for different fonts that you can use. And even on this one, the cool thing about this is you can pick time periods, different decades to choose from, which is one of the reasons why I really like this site. Because if you're like, oh, I need something for 1960s, you can come on here and it'll give you, those don't really look too 1960s. Oh no, there we go. You can get like psychedelic looking stuff, Dalek, for my Doctor Who fans. But on here you can pick all kinds of different styles that you want to use. Same thing on DeFont. You get several different kinds of styles. You can pick like cartoon, comic, whatever you're looking for. Ooh, bubblegum's fun. Just gonna grab that one just for funsies. So you just hit download. It comes up as a zip file. The .ttf is the file that you would want to click on. It would then give you this. You don't need to print it. And then you would just hit install and it'll automatically go into your program. If not, there's a way around it to pull it into your program, but you have to go through your files. So what was the name of that font? Bubblegum. So there it is right there. Now I have a new font. Hello. Another thing on Illustrator is if you grab it and you hold down the Alt key, you'll see that all of a sudden there are now 2 arrows there. This is making a copy of the one that you just grabbed. And it makes it up on a new layer to where you get an extra copy of it, exact of what it is. You can use this with anything. This entire thing I can hold down Alt and pull to the side. And now I have a complete copy of that right there, vectors and all. It's completely the same. So when you are working with Illustrator fonts, you do want to be careful with your stroke and everything on there, because right now I can put a stroke on it. So let me just do a white outline. But as you can see, I can't change it to go to the outside or go to the inside like you could in Photoshop in the last one. In this one, it won't actually let you do that until you right click on it and then hit create outlines, or you can shift Control O and that'll outline it for you. So now this then becomes a vector and you cannot change it. So I would definitely, especially when you're working with clients and you have many changes to make, you're going to want to hang on to that original font in case they're like, oh, I don't want hello now. I would rather have hi. So that way you can change it. Then you can change the wording, because now you can't change it. That's when you can then align the stroke to go onto the inside, the outside, and then you can change the size of it so that way it's not just sitting in the middle doing whatever it's doing. You can change it to the inside and the outside. And then if you have harsh lines like that, that's poking out right there, you can see it, because sometimes not all the vectors are smooth. Sometimes this line or that line might be doing something funky, or maybe that line. So you could go in and fix it if you wanted to, if you want to go in here and change it. What I'm doing is I'm actually hitting A, and that's giving me my direct selection tool. So this lets you directly click on your anchors. And then you can go back to your regular selection tool by hitting, I think this is V. I'm missing my keyboard keys. But another trick you can do is just click in there and then you click on this guy. And that just rounds out the joints for you, so that way it's not poking out the side. That's one way you can do it. And then this one also just kind of nicks it out, but as you can see there's a little nick there. So I'll just keep that like that. So that way I don't have to go in there and pull it apart, try to figure out why that's a mess in there. But that's the only thing with finding fonts online, is you don't always know what kind of state they're in, because you're not paying for them, so you're not really paying for it to be high quality or anything. They're free unless you're doing donations, but there's so many thousands of fonts on there to choose from that are free. So that's just a little quick rundown on text within Illustrator. That's why it is so different than Photoshop, because in Photoshop you basically can still mess with the font. So that's the basic rundown on text. I could spend an entire day on text, but I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to give you a basic rundown on how all this stuff works. So let's go over to our picture. Similar to the setup that it is on Photoshop. You have your properties, you have your color. We won't get into image trace today. That's a whole other ballgame. So you want to mostly focus on your properties, your layers, and then I like to put my stroke, my gradient, transparency, and appearance down at the bottom, because you want to have those kind of readily available to you. Whenever you make any kind of changes where you have a blur or a drop shadow or your opacity or anything like that, it's going to show up in your appearance, and then you can turn them off and on. Your transparency, that's whether or not your layer is going to be normal, you're going to darken it, you're going to do any kind of weird changes to it. That's kind of how that one's set up. So we'll play around with that one another time. Your gradients are going to be any of the colors that you're messing with. So like how I did with the text over here, I have my outside stroke and then I have my inside color. And with those you can change them depending on if you pick another color within here or if you create another color. So if you double click on that, you can actually go select other colors. But if you want to have a gradient, you can click directly into here, and then you can change this color by double clicking on it, going over to your swatches, and then you can change your color. And if you want, you can go in here for CMYKs, or if you're under RGB, it'll say RGB. And you can change these different colors in here, making it pink, blue, whatever you want. Double click on that color, change it over to blue just for funsies, and then do the same thing where you can slide the little sliders around and kind of find the exact color that you would like for it. And you can also change the direction that it is facing. So you could do that, or you can just click inside here and you can hold down your arrows, your up and down arrows, which will then change which direction it is facing. 90 degrees is directly up or down, and then with this guy you can change the direction that it is sitting. Fun thing with gradients. So gradients have changed for Illustrator. You now have the ability to freeform with the gradient. You also have the radial gradient here, which turns into a circle. You can also pull it across. If you go over here and you select your gradient tool, you can actually click on one side, hold down Shift, and pull to the other side, which will then pull the gradient all the way across your lettering. But you also have a way to freeform it now, which will then change up here, and it'll show points and lines for your properties, which actually I should probably just grab a box. That might be the easiest way to show you instead of in lettering. So I will select the box, click on freeform, which now changes to all these different colors, and you see these circles now. It has changed immensely since the year before last, because this came out last year with the Adobe platform, and a lot of people still don't quite know how to use it correctly. So within here you would double click on it, which will then give you your different sliders of picking your different colors, which will change in each corner. And you can add more points, or you can do lines, or you can grab a color from another area. So within these you can move it around, and you can see it overtaking that yellow over there as you're moving it. Until you're a little bit more comfortable working with the gradients in here, this does become a little bit confusing. It is a little bit like painting on top of, I guess, a plate is kind of what it feels like you're pushing the colors around like a kid again. Or you remember that old 90s toy that you would push on the screen and the colors would change on the screen as you're like pushing the goo through? It's kind of what it feels like. So you get these points of color, which you can then move around and make exactly the color look that you're going for. I haven't really used it too awful much because most of the time I either just use a flat color or a gradient going into one color or another. Not typically for something like this. However, if you're trying to like paint a picture within it or do very specific colors, like if you're doing a parrot or something and you need a background that's a gradient background with multiple colors in it, then I could see why you would use something like this. But no matter where you click, you can put a different color down, and then you can go within that color, double click, and change that color. So when you get an item that is multiple layers, so when you would pull one of these apart for one of your clients or for yourself, however you're doing your Illustrator game, you would want to definitely, I pull them apart to see where everything is within the layers. So when you click on this, you see it just says layer 1. But if you hit this little guy down, apparently a couple times because it's grouped a couple times, you can see there's multiple layers, and then you got a group, and a group to where it leads into all the different pieces. And you can actually go in and select all these individual pieces by clicking over on the side. So if you realize that you had one that was messed up, so let's say you were like, oh, I don't want that there, I want to move it over, you could then move it over independently of everything else without messing up your stuff. Which is a very nice thing about Illustrator, where in Photoshop, if you paint something, you're done. You can't go back and really change it. You got to paint over top of it. Where in this, Illustrator just makes millions of layers. Not always millions, but it makes a lot of layers until it creates the image that you're looking at here. So when it comes all together like this, it's all one piece. In order to pull it apart, you got to select the item, right click on the item, and you're going to ungroup it because it has all been grouped together, and it has all been grouped multiple times. And as you see, I'm ungrouping it. It is getting much smaller here on the other side. So I did ungroup twice. You can see where it ungrouped and then ungrouped. Now I got to ungroup one more time to get in there. And there we go. Now all the pieces are individual layers. I mean, they're still grouped in layers. That's one thing that you kind of want to do to save yourself some time, is to group similar things together. So this one has the snow attached together. You have the back, or the bottom, sorry. Excuse me. You have the bottom as one layer, and then you have this guy as another layer. So I'm going to back out just a little bit, and I'm going to pull that Merry Christmas up here. And just kind of pull this guy apart to show you. So here's the snow, we're going to pull that over, and then the snow on this side, we'll pull that over. So now you see the background, those little guys, pull that over, pull those over, and you finally get to the background. You get all the way to the background layer, and this background layer is one layer. Above that, you probably have this guy, and then these guys, and the trees, which it looks like the trees are separate. And then all the way into this dude. And you can actually move the layers around. So as I'm selecting these, the layers are back here. So all the way at the bottom, so the mesh is at the bottom. And then you go up and you got each layer here on top of each other until you finally get up to this guy, which is all of these pieces here grouped into one group. So I can actually group them all together, so you can just go around, select them, and what I'm doing is holding down Shift as I click on them, which selects them all together, and then I hold down Control, or if you're on a Mac, it's Command, and then you're gonna hit G, which will automatically group those little guys together. So now you see that they're all in that same layer together. Cool beans? Cool beans. So let's go up to this little Merry Christmas, and I'm just going to put another airboard down so that way you can see it a little bit better. Switch back over. So this little dude here is many different layers. You can kind of just scroll over it with your mouse and you'll see that the many different layers are selecting themselves as you go over. I'm going to right click and I'm going to ungroup that guy, and now they're all in individual pieces. So I can pull these out of here if I decide, oh, I want to take these out. You can just grab and pull them. That is the lovely thing about Illustrator. All of these are different shapes, different items, and you can pull them all apart. I can ungroup that, pull that guy out of there, and this actually has a mesh layer on top of it, so you can see where there is you can see where there's a light spot here, and then it darkens up right here because there's another mesh layer on top of it. That's the cool thing about Illustrator, and definitely using those gradients, because this specific spot here, you can see is a different color. So that's the color that has been selected on the color wheel. That's what's there, that's what's there. super fun. You really just want to play around with the shapes. One of the easiest ways to learn it is to grab an image like I did here, pull it apart, see how it works, see how the layers work on it, because you can see that that is behind and in front of certain things. Like it's in front of some of these pines, and then it's behind the lettering and everything, because it even looks like the lettering has been doubled over instead of putting a drop shadow on it. One of the easier things with layering on Illustrator is you can make multiple layers within a layer. So if you're wanting to get to, say something's grouped and you don't want to pull it apart, you can double click on the item, which will then bring you into the group layer. So then you can select this individually. So you can click on that, or you can click on the background and pull the pieces apart and move them around. So if you were like, oh, like if you put it together and it was off about that much, you could be like, oh no, I need to go in there. So you double click on it, grab the piece that you need to move, and then you would just shift it over. You could either use your mouse if you want to move it that way with your hand, or you can also use your arrow keys to move them around. You can hold shift and move your arrow keys, which will move it more drastically. And then you just double click out of it and it's all still grouped together, so that way you don't have to mess with it too much if you have other stuff around it. And then of course back up, because it's fine, I'll just put it back where it belongs. But that's kind of how you use Illustrator. It's multiple layers on top of each other, and you kind of just have to pull them apart, move them around. Within your layers here, if you wanted to say, oh, I want to send this to the back, you can right click on it and you can arrange it, which will, you can send it backwards a step or send to the very back, which will then, if I send this to the very back, you see it's over here on the screen right now. I almost pointed to it. You guys can't see my pointing, you can only see this. So here it is sitting right here towards the top. I'm going to send it to the back, which you can then see it selected, but if I click away, you can't see it anymore unless you select the entire thing. So you can go all the way to the bottom. So it's at the very bottom of the entire list now. So if you do lose something and you're not sure where it is over here under your layers, you can select the area, deselect the things that you're not messing with. Beep, 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 and a beep. Oh, beep. Until you find the item that you're looking for. And if it's all the way in the back and you're like, oh, I don't want it all the way back there, you can then arrange it and bring it to the front. So yeah, that's kind of your basic rundown on Illustrator. Anything from there, it kind of gets a little bit more in depth in how you use all the different pieces. So if there is a certain item that you're curious about how to use within Illustrator, let me know. I have been working with Illustrator religiously for about 3 years now. I used it off and on for many years. I mostly used like Photoshop and stuff beforehand until I got into my current day job, which I use Illustrator all day long. But that's kind of the basic rundown on how to use Illustrator, how to get started with it, using it for logos or any kind of vector image that you're trying to create, whether it's for like logo designing or anything like that. Anytime you need to make a vector, Illustrator's your man. If you're interested in downloading Illustrator, there'll be a link in the description below taking you to it, and I look forward to teaching you more in the future. If you have anything specific that you would like to see, please leave a comment down below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, and if you know someone that has been wanting to learn Illustrator, please share this with them. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!